Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Community Engagement in Climate Action Research Workshop series. This month's workshop is on sustainable partnerships. It centers on defining and exploring sustainable partnerships between communities and researchers. Society must collectively move beyond extractive research agreements and towards cooperative, sustainable partnerships. While research funding often supports creating programs, the funders then expect those programs to become self-sufficient. That doesn't always happen, resulting in temporary alliances and wasted capacity building. While this is an expected way of life in academia, it is not in a community. Imagine building a new park every few years, then leaving it in disrepair to build another new park. We can and must do better. So some topics we've discussed in our other 7 virtual workshops are particularly relevant today. So from February, we had a workshop on collaborative agreements and memoranda of understanding. And so some highlights from there are creating a shared vision and understanding between the researchers and the community partners, and doing all that at the start of the partnership as a key foundation for a sustainable partnership. Another highlight comes from the April workshop on building and maintaining trust. So we need to be empathetic about our partnerships and avoid common mistakes that researchers make. We need to understand the history and the experiences that our community partners have had before we come onto the scene, because trust is hard to establish, easy to break, and even harder to reestablish. And so if you have not attended our previous workshops, I encourage you to check out our website and look at the recordings. So now we will start with a presentation on an example sustainable partnership from Dr. Ruth Dahlquist Willard, the Interim Director of UC Agriculture and Natural Resources, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. She will discuss the UC Agriculture and Natural Resources Sustainable or Small Farms Network, which is founded in 1979. It is older than me, as the Small Farm Program. So Agriculture and Natural Resources does some of the best community engagement of any UCOP division. And the Small Farms Network is a great example of the challenges and successes we can have in these sustainable partnerships. Take it away, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Well, it's great to be here today and also to hear about the conversations that it sounds like have been happening in the past. I think everything Thomas said, I really related to about the challenges of working on grant-funded projects and, the timelines that comes with and how difficult that can be to fit into university programs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our Small Farms Network at the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, and give you a sense of the history of that, the sustainability of the funding, and the methods of community engagement that we've employed. So just some background on what we do. We have small farms cooperative extension advisors based in several counties. And those advisors have duties that are similar to other cooperative extension advisors of applied research and extension based in counties. And then also have this additional layer of really serving as a hub or a bridge for small scale farms and underserved farmers to connect to the education and research resources of UC. And so the farmers that we're looking at specifically are small scale and diversified family farms. Diversified meaning they grow more than one crop or have more than one source of income. A lot of the clientele are refugee and immigrant and other underserved farmers and beginning farmers. crops that are not covered by the major the California commodity boards. So major commodities would be things like dairy, citrus, almonds, pistachios, stone fruits, grapes, and a lot of these crops are grown on much smaller acreages. And then farms that have some kind of alternate marketing, usually more direct and niche markets versus large national and wholesale markets. Here's just an example of some of the Asian specialty crops that are grown in Fresno and Santa Clara counties, as well as Sacramento and other places throughout the state. We have daikon, taro root, different varieties of eggplants, lemongrass, ginger, bunching onions, loofah squash, bitter melon, and many other specialty crops that are grown on small acreages, but are very important for a lot of culturally diverse communities in California. And one of the other things we do besides regular applied research and extension programs is technical assistance, which is usually used to refer more to helping farmers access resources, which often require a lot of paperwork and that have barriers to accessing programs. So we help with all these areas: crop production, disease, pest and nutrient management, irrigation, food safety requirements, and other regulatory compliance programs. And then we assist farmers in applying to grants and incentives programs, many of which are climate related. So you can see our numbers there. We've got about 2,500 small scale farmers just since July 2021, so about over the last 3 years. And the vast majority of those are what we would call historically underserved or socially disadvantaged farmers. There are different preferences for those terms, but basically that means farmers who have experienced some kind of historic discrimination in the past. And probably some of you are already familiar with UC Agricultural Natural Resources, but just in case you're not, this is a broad overview of our facilities and programs. So UC Cooperative Extension is part of UC We've got the Cooperative Extension Advisors based in counties. We've got also staff, many of whom are community educators doing local program delivery. And then we have specialists based on campuses and also at the research and extension centers, and which we have 9 of throughout the state. And then also through the Ag Experiment Station, there's funding for faculty positions on 5 of the campuses, which are Davis, Berkeley, Riverside, and now Santa Cruz and Merced have been added to that. And then you can see our statewide programs. The one that Small Farms is currently under is SARUP, which I'm the interim director of. That's a Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. And I'll give you a little bit of the history, since we're talking about program sustainability, of the funding and institutional support for our program. So as Thomas mentioned, this goes back to 1979, and a little bit of the history that really is relevant to community engagement. This was something that the UC system at the time was not all that supportive of, and it was really advocated for by community partners. So there was sort of a crisis in California when the mechanical tomato harvester was developed at UC Davis, and there's a complex history there. It was created to help solve a labor shortage problem, and it had sort of an unintended consequence of a lot of family farms going out of business if they were not large enough to invest in equipment, and also farm worker jobs being lost. And so as a result, partly of that lawsuit and partly of advocacy with the California state legislature, A&R received funding to hire 6 cooperative extension farm advisors who were all bilingual, Spanish speaking, to specifically target small scale Spanish speaking and other underserved farmers. And then we had the Small Farm Center the next year, which was at UC Davis until 2009. And it did a lot of more central management, like applying for and managing grants that it shared across all the counties, coordinating between campus and county collaborations, producing materials for education and extension, putting on conferences and trainings, and then supporting research on small acreage crops, again, not the major commodities for California. And then that continued with quite a lot of success until 2009, when during the recession, it was closed by A&R administration. although the advisor positions continued, and one of the staff positions, Michael Yang there, serving the Hmong refugee community in Fresno. And then Shemaine Hardesty, the director, continued for a while part-time and then retired in 2017. And so then it sort of didn't have any central support for several years until in 2021, we started to get a lot of large contracts from public agencies that wanted to specifically fund technical assistance for small and underserved farmers with regulatory compliance and access to climate-related and COVID-related disaster relief. So that really helped expand the program again and provided new funding for staff positions and to expand the program to additional counties. And you can see the difference that state agency funding made. So here's before 2021, this is kind of in when the program had been cut back a lot as a statewide program, didn't have a director, and we basically just had 4 small farms advisors and staff that they had hired on grants in 4 counties. And then this is post all that agency funding, adding a new advisor in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, and then all these additional bilingual staff throughout the state with 7 new staff positions and also some central administrative positions. So in terms of sustainability, I think, I guess we're just grateful for that additional funding, but it definitely took a lot of engagement with agencies to help them see the importance of the program. I just wanted to give you a sense of some of our community engagement with our research programs. I guess this one is not exactly climate related, but this is an example of a research activity on alternatives to pesticides in one of the Asian specialty crops, which is long bean or Asian yard long bean. And so it's got an aphid, the cowpea aphid, which is a pretty serious pest that damages it. You can see those levels of aphid infestation are really high. And we have colleagues at UC Riverside who are plant breeders working on developing new lines with resistance to aphids, going back to germplasm in West Africa with resistance and crossing it with local varieties, and then doing field trials. And there's a lot of sensitivity often about culturally important crops and research on those crops. And so we've tried very hard to involve the local community and gather their feedback and involve them in testing it on their farms and inviting them to field days. And one of the things that we did was a taste test, which was really fun. So this is Bao Lam Hyun, the researcher from UC Riverside, who's the plant breeder. And we did this tasting day where everybody got to taste the new varieties, and both in raw form, which you can't eat them raw, and then cooked in a more typical dish like a curry or stir fry. And then the farmers got to rank them and see if they thought this would meet the needs of their marketing strategies. And so just an example of trying to do more events, focus on the community, involve them as much as possible, and ask for their feedback and their input on whether they like these new varieties or what they would like to change. Another thing we've been able to do that's climate related is crisis response. During COVID, we did a lot of what I would just call crisis response and disaster relief, working with vaccination programs and distributing PPE and doing education on health and safety requirements for things like farmers market stands or on-farm worker protections. Also in the past few years, working with drought relief, wildfires, especially smoke, and flooding, especially last winter when we had the atmospheric rivers, or the year before this last year. And so we have these relationships with communities on the ground. We often have bilingual staff based in the counties. Some of them are from the local community. This is Michael Yang up here with this kabocha squash, which is, he's been there for 30 years actually with the Southeast Asian refugee community, and is fully fluent in Hmong and has very trusted relationships in the community. So that allows us to pivot when a crisis occurs, whether it's climate related or a pandemic, and get resources to where they're needed and really be in touch with the local needs. Here's another example. This is one of the counties with a small farms advisor, Aparna Gazula in Santa Clara County, and then a previous employee, Shu Wen Feng. And so this county has a large population of Chinese immigrant farmers growing Asian specialty vegetables. And Parna's program has been able to bring in basically over $4 million since 2021, or actually 2019, of um, disaster and climate related funding where farmers with language barriers or cultural barriers to accessing resources might not otherwise have been able to do that. So the Healthy Soils program through CDFA and the SWEEP program through CDFA in particular help farmers relate or respond to climate challenges as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so those are really important programs to help farmers access. And here's just some numbers on that. So on our economic relief for COVID and drought through both state and federal, this is CDFA, California Department of Food and Agriculture, and then USDA during the coronavirus relief period. We were able to bring in large amounts of dollars to small scale farmers in California. And then through CDFA's climate smart programs, the Healthy Soils program and the SWEET program, we've also been able to help farmers access those. So I have a few recommendations for engaging with these diverse communities, which again many are immigrant or refugee farmers or other historically underserved farmers who might not have as much trust in public programs, and especially in programs that involve a certain amount of bureaucracy to access resources. So these are just a list of things we found helpful. It's very key to hire staff who can speak to the community from the inside, who are bilingual and speak the language, and who are familiar with the needs of the community and their preferred modes of communication. And some of those might be different from traditional modes. We find that email and putting things online is not always the most effective way. So we have radio outreach. We sometimes make videos and share them. Social media does seem to be partly effective. And then we also have texting or messaging platforms and use a combination of strategies that are maybe less conventional now, or maybe a little more analog and less digital. And then making events and services accessible. So it's often really important to schedule things at the right time of day or the right season when small scale farmers are less busy. Even things like when is the time when a lot of people are dropping off kids or picking up kids from school, and just being sensitive to the rhythms of the community. And then also a lot of things going through individual or personal contacts rather than things being accessible online. That's still a lot of personal connection. For educational events and applied or participatory research, the more hands-on activities and participatory interactive activities, the better, and versus PowerPoints, for example, or webinars. And then I just wanted to put it out there that, we are part of the UC system, and please feel free to consider us for partnerships, for reaching out to communities and around, topics that are relevant to food, agriculture, or environmental concerns. Keeping farmer contacts confidential. This is often difficult with, again, everything being online, kind of accessible in databases, but we try to be very sensitive to farmers wanting to have their information be confidential. And then, as Thomas mentioned at the beginning, I think it's just very true that it takes a lot of time to build meaningful trust, or to build trust and to really engage meaningfully. And it's often not on the timeline of grants. And so when writing grants or getting other funding, the more that can be built in, the better, with maybe a slower ramp up time in the beginning to allow for more conversation with community members, so that it's not as rushed and there's time for the community to give feedback. And, at a certain level, I don't know that we're going to fix that exactly, just because this is how funding seems to work now on 3-year or 5-year timelines. But the more that can be built in a strategic way, the better. And that's it. If you want to find us online, here's our website. Or if you want to find an advisor in a particular county, we have a link to do that. And that's it. So I guess I'll stop here and see if there's any questions.
Back, everyone. I am wrapping up the notes from group one. But so in our last 15 minutes together, if all of the facilitators are just folks, or actually, do we have everyone here? We've lost some folks. Fortunately, can I see if everyone's moved back to the main room?
Yeah, the rooms are shut. Some people left earlier.
All right, there we go. Just making sure I don't launch the train without all the passengers on board. So in the last 15 minutes here, we'll just do a report out from all of the breakout groups. And since I am in group number one, I'll start. So it's a tough topic of figuring out how to build sustainable partnerships. And so when we discussed what does it mean to have a sustainable relationship? It's things like lasting beyond grants, not overtaxing people, that they're kind of that for research community partnerships that the whatever the research work is being done also helps the community with whatever their own initiatives or their needs are. And so to put a biological term on it, there's some mutualism that is needed for the relationships to be sustainable. And then talking about some of the success stories and challenges. So a challenge is about community organizations are already under-resourced and overtaxed, understaffed, and so it's hard to push the research timelines in that, given that, especially when you only have a certain amount of time to spend for money, to spend the money. And so we
Mhm.
talked a little bit about solutions on there that it's easier for state or federal entities probably to ask for extensions from their legislative bodies. And so getting money first sent to, say, a state agency or a governor's office, and then in delivering a program might help with the timeline on funding, but then just kind of advocacy, telling legislators, legislative analyst office, everyone who's administrating this money that if you want good community engaged research, sustainable partnerships, you need a longer timeline for spending the money. And even just things that don't require spending the money, like building the relationships. We had an interesting question on how community groups balance kind of the influx of requests from researchers. And so one of our members said of, prioritizing the requests again that are aligned with whatever the community is already doing, and then kind of working with the trusted partners that they've built the relationships with. Let's see, dedicated staff for grant writing and fundraising is one way that something can become sustainable because as long as that person makes more money than their salary and overhead, that's at least a step in the right direction. We talked about sustaining large networks. So you've built this great network statewide. How do you get it keep that sustained beyond the funding? So thinking about a long-term planning, a governance structure, processes for seeing new initiatives and prioritizing, which people in that network could work on it and keeping things kind of away from the bureaucratic processes like the university and admin research funding thing that can often bog down and siphon stuff. So anytime you can budget for capacity building in the community organizations, that's always a plus. And let's see. Yeah, that it is a challenge for the communities, especially because not only are they worrying about or their own funding, their own sustained funding, that now there's this additional research program that can be a challenge to also find the ongoing funding support, which is why that mutualism really comes into play. Because if you're both advancing towards the same mission, towards solving the same problem, then you can use that money to solve different thing or the same thing. And so like these climate action grants are a great example because since we're all trying to work to solve or to adapt to climate change, using grant money and trying to convince the funders and the people who provide that grant money to make that funding available for operations of community groups be helpful. And then the last note on kind of changing the culture, things like what I just mentioned, or university offices dedicated to community engagement, dedicated staff towards helping the community and using the resources that we have at the university to give back to the communities, fulfill our mission as a land grant institution, as a public serving entity, without always asking for anything in return, and just building those relationships, and then advocate. So finding good examples like these climate action grants and telling all of the people that give money out and the legislators and every important person that this is the way it needs to be done, or that here are successful examples of how you can have a good community engaged research program and what you need to get it done. And with that, I will go to group 2, breakout room 2. Oh, Sen, you are muted.
Yes, I was. So, thank you so much for that. We had a really great conversation in the second Zoom room that I wanted to just share some highlights. One of the things, so these are things that also I think came up in room 1, that funders crafting requests for applications to support community and academic folks doing community engaged research. That's going to be a really important thing moving forward, that putting more pressure on funders to actually create projects and timeline calls for applications that are reflective, understand or show understanding of the lots of time that it takes to create and engage sustainably, create partnerships, engage sustainably. That was one thing that came up in our group. Then another thing was practical technical support. So, even technical support on filling out specific forms that are asked for by the grantor, that can be very useful, as oftentimes in community engaged projects or community partner projects, it may be the first time that a campus is seeing a specific requirement for pre-funding. So having technical support available for those pieces can be very useful. Also, a note around the partnered grant approach, where funding goes out separately to communities and then separately to academic orgs, so that the subcontracting process does not create a delay. Folks also had several different really good things that they offered as resources. So let's see, here is the climate action community engagement page that I'm linking in the chat. But also there are several books that came up in the discussion that I'm linking here in the chat. And there was some discussion around approaches to decolonizing research. That was a strong theme in our discussion as well. I'll end it there because I don't want to take up too much of the group's time, but it was just a fascinating discussion together. Thank you for everyone who was in that room.
Thank you, Sen. I love books. I hope that the Oakland Public Library has some of those on audiobooks so I can
They
listen
look
to them
really
while
good. Yeah.
Okay, so then group 3 was dissolved and spread out amongst our other groups to make sure that we had enough people there for the conversation. So we will go to group 4 for the report out next.
Group 4 also had an engaging conversation, and thank you to all the breakout members that were in our room. And we really focused on what would be necessary to continue robust partnerships where there's equal value of the partners, mutual partnership and collaboration. And some key tips that we came away with is to work across partners, work collectively, almost in a consortium fashion, and understand what partners can take on key activities beyond the term of a grant. So already be kind of teed up for certain partners to take take the baton forward for specific activities, so that to create sustainability in those areas, build on connections going forward, and bridge projects as time goes on. And this would build capacity for those partners across this consortium, and also help avoid competing for the same opportunities going forward. So you're working collectively. And I love this analogy that not everyone has to bring the same dish to the potluck. So everybody's doing something unique and moving forward, again, to build capacity for the collective. We also talked about um, ways in which we could change the research culture. And longer grant periods definitely came up. Also, the challenge of the fact that some of the community capacity building activities that we want to do are outside of the scope of the project or the award for the funding initiative. But one key thing would be looking at the merit and promotion process for academics and faculty, so that we can incentivize community engagement and service, applied research, and may I say also like innovation. And so without this recognition, there's the focus on research publication, and and leads to the possibility of more extractive behaviors. And so I hurled up ANR as and their promotion and tenure process as something that our BCRs and provosts across the campus, across the systems can go to as a resource for looking at how to change those practices. Um, one unique comment that came up as well was valuing and leveraging the relationships of students embedded in communities. So leveraging the fact that students come from the local communities, and as they're building their research agendas and their research programs, leverage those relationships and build upon those relationships to help change the research culture. And also looking to the next generation to make sure that researchers are prepared to conduct community engagement as researchers. And I don't know what the role of UCOP may be in this, but fellowships that could support looking at a system level of placing students that are embedded in communities with researchers across the system to serve the communities that they're from. So looking at it, making sure students come with funding and that they're poised and positioned to work within communities for their own research training. And then lastly, learning from our own institutional histories, and coming with an awareness and a knowledge of what's been done in communities with prior actors from your institution before going out to do work yourself. So that was what I'll leave us with, and I welcome our group to add to anything that I've shared here.
We can just open it up. So we got 2 minutes left. So any other thoughts from anyone? Thank you all for being here and participating in the discussions. We look forward to seeing you at our next events.